Today, we are going to discuss the ecological approach to the study of public administration enunciated by Frederick F. W. Rix. The ecological approach proposed by Fred W. Rix, which attempts to appraise the global system in which public administrative subsystem operates. The third world countries, which were liberated mostly after the Second World War, had experts from the United States as consultants. In spite of their advice and consultancy, the political systems started crumbling, and the administrative systems became ineffective and inefficient. Their economies started getting into deeper crisis. The Western scholars were puzzled with the experiences that the third world was passing through. It is these developments that prompted to the development of new concepts and explanations. It is in the wake of this new awareness and thinking that the concept of ecology was developed. Frederick Rix, the pioneer of the concept of ecological approach, was a Chinese-born and American-trained scholar. Rix pointed out that each society has certain unique characteristics which influence the working of its subsystems. He found that most of the Western theories focused on inside the organization but not on its relations with outside the system. He found the cause in the incompatibility of the Western models to the needs and demands of the third world countries. Let us now look at the concept of ecology. The concept of ecology is drawn from the concept of plant biology. In biology, it is established that a particular plant which is grown in a particular climatic conditions cannot be grown in a different environmental setting. As a plant cannot grow in a different environment, an institution also cannot thrive in a different social setting. The concept of ecology, unlike earlier approaches, takes a very wide conceptual framework, adopts a systemic approach to the understanding of organization phenomenon. In spite of concentrating on a subsystem, the concept of ecology takes a holistic view of the organization. This is the reason why Rix sought to categorize the broad systems at a micro level and attempts to apply those characteristics to the micro subsystems such as bureaucracy, market, associations, etc. Rix has took the global systems as a frame of reference to his categorization for the three major systems, namely fused, prismatic and diffracted. It is these three models that one has to appreciate to understand the concept of ecology. The fused societies refers to the traditional subsystems where the ascriptive values dominate the society. The ascriptive values in these societies determine the place and the role of an individual and his achievements. Applying the structural functional criterion, it is pointed out that the traditional social systems are largely underdeveloped. There is a low level of differentiation in the structures and the functions. It is this low degree of differentiation that accounts for low level of efficiency and expertise of institutions in a traditional society. In contrast, in a diffracted society, there is a high degree of differentiation in both the structures and the functions. The developing societies whose social structure remained basically traditional borrowed the institutions from the advanced industrial societies, but they could not transplant these structures and the norms and values associated with them effectively in their own soil. The modernity of these institutions encountered the traditionalists of the social system. To explain this phenomenon, the ecological approach borrows the conceptual framework from the light theory in physics. We can observe that the sun ray combines in itself all the 7 colors called vibhya. This symbolizes structural functional fusion into one structure. The ray in its multicolored form appears in a diffracted form when it passes through a prism. These colors indicate the clear-cut differentiation of the structures and the functions. The developing societies are compared with a prism which is capable of facilitating the diffraction of the sun ray. In other words, the sun ray undergoes the process of change in the prism. Therefore, the developing societies are described as prismatic societies. Prismatic societies exhibit certain unique characteristics which are a result of increasing interaction between modernity and tradition. Rix not only describes these characteristics but applies them to all the subsystems in the society. Let us now briefly discuss the features of prismatic model. They are formalism, heterogeneity and overlapping. Pay some attention on the one important feature, that is formalism. It refers to the gap between what is stated and what is practically done. In every society, the degree of formalism is determined by its own socio-economic conditions. While in some societies the degree of formalism is high, in certain others it may be less. The incidence of formalism is more in prismatic societies when compared with fused or diffracted. In fused and diffracted societies, the realism is higher and the gap between the stated objectives and the real performance is relatively lesser. An explanation for the incidence of formalism lies more in the conflict between the tradition and the modernity, which is widely prevalent in prismatic societies. From Indian society and its socio-economic systems, we can cite a number of examples which highlights the widespread formalism. On the political front, there is a widespread incidence of constitutional formalism. Constitutional formalism refers to the gap between the constitutional principles and their actual intention. Second feature, that is heterogeneity, it is concerned to the prismatic society that is suffers from the high degree of heterogeneity too, owing to the presence of diametrically opposite views and conflict between the modern and traditional values. The social change sometimes is inconsistent and puzzling. The heterogeneous character of prismatic society is so evident when one looks at the most sophisticated modern transport like aeroplane and continued dependence of some of the rural people on bullock carts for transport. On actual front, we find that the ultra-modern Western lifestyles and also extremely tradition-oriented lifestyles. On the one hand, we have hospitals and modern equipment and also quakes who depend on hunches and superstitions. The heterogeneity is caused by these conflicting styles, practices and ideas contributes to the increasing confusion in the society. It is these conditions that make planning ineffective and priorities distorted. The system in general gets subjected to pressures and counter pressures, pulls and counter pulls. Heterogeneity leads to conflict in the implementation of developmental programs. While the stated goals promise help to the weaker sections, the actual fruits reach the better off sections. In a polynormative situation, neither individual nor the institutional behavior is governed by a set of uniform and clearly articulated norms. Third important feature of a prismatic society is overlapping. It is basically refers to the duplication and repetitiveness in the functions and the structures. In fused societies, traditional structures perform almost all kinds of functions, and in a diffracted society, the differentiation of these structures and functions reach a point where one structure performs one function only. It is the combination of these two trends that causes the overlapping of the functions. A religious organization like church or Tirupati temple would not only perform the ecclesiastical functions but also certain other socio-cultural, such as running of educational institutions or hospitals or local transport, etc. The administrative system in these societies, which is also known as the subsystem of prismatic societies, is known as Sala model. Sala model means the administrative subsystem. We must keep in mind that the characteristics that are present in the larger prismatic society are reflected in all the subsystems of a society, and the administrative subsystem is of no exception. In the fused society, as discussed earlier, highly personalized and descriptive values exist. Here, the administrative system is known as chamber. In a diffracted society, the administrative system is governed by impersonal and modern values, and it is known as office or bureau. The administrative system in a prismatic society is a product of these two conflicting systems. As a result, the office does not work in the same fashion as it does in diffracted society. Therefore, ecological approach maintains that to use the term office to describe the administrative system of a prismatic society is highly misleading. Therefore, Rix prefers to use the word Sala in the place of office. About the origin of the term Sala, there are two interpretations. One believes that it has Spanish origins. The other interpretation traces its origins to the Sanskrit word Shala, which is used to describe different structures and functions. The words such as Pathashala, Nartanashala, Pakashala, etc. indicate that the same description is used for school, dancing place, kitchen, etc. In Riggs's analysis, it is an indication of absence of structural functional differentiation. Therefore, he describes the Indian office system as Sala because of the multiplicity of functions that it performs. The Sala is a product of conflict between different values. This is typical of prismatic heterogeneity, as it is not governed by a set of homogeneous norms. It leads to polynormative situation. In the office system, the functioning of administration is more normative and systematic. In contrast, in the Sala, the response is not uniform. Rix considers that administration in a prismatic society does not normally follow the methods of an office system in the diffracted societies, and therefore he describes that this is a characteristic of Sala model. Rix also finds Western nomenclature is inadequate to explain either cultural or economic activities. Therefore, he describes the cultural associations such as cliques and markets as bazaar canteen. Let us now pay some attention on these two subsystems as he has explained, that is the cliques. In a diffracted society, there are a number of clubs and professional associations which cater to the occupational, cultural or social needs of its members. In fused societies, there are certain sects based on narrow and familiar loyalties. It is a reflection of the features of both club of a diffracted society and a sects of a fused societies. Similarly, he has also pointed out the another important subsystem, that is bazaar canteen. In a diffracted society, the market prices are determined by supply and demand. The relationship between the producers and the sellers, consumers, tend to be impersonal. The price of a commodity therefore is fixed on certain systematized norms. In a prismatic society, the market does not perform a similar role. The seller may charge higher price to a stranger and a lower price to a friend. Sometimes the prices also determined by the bargaining capacity of the consumer. Bargaining and charging price to the same commodity do not fit in the market system. Rix also gives the example of certain canteens where the food items are sold at a subsidized rate, and in some other canteens they may be collect a higher price to meet some other welfare functions. Therefore, he describes the economic subsystem as a bazaar canteen model in a prismatic society. This indicates how the macro trends in the larger social system influence all the subsystems in a transitional society. This theory is subjected to severe criticism, and a lot of debate is going on in the administrative literature. The critics emphasizes that the importance of the environment and its influence on the administrative subsystem. If administration reflects the general conditions and characteristics in the society, where from does the change originate? This approach seeks to establish that there is a continuous equilibrium between the larger system and the subsystems. The equilibrium oriented model stands more for stability rather than change. In a developed society, the equilibrium may have a positive impact, but in a developing society where society has to transform, equilibrium is not only negative but counterproductive. Another criticism is that the administrative structures are entrusted with the heavy responsibility of bringing about change in all facets of the community. In fact, the whole discussion on development bureaucracy revolves around the concept of change. The ecological approach critics do not look at the administrative system as a change agent. The social system that emerges from such an analysis is mostly of static character and affected by the changes outside the bureaucratic system. Thus, it almost establishes that the administration is more a victim of its own environment than a viable instrument which can control and change the environment. The categorization of the societies into fused, prismatic and diffracted is based on the values inherent in a capitalist system. The analysis very clearly indicates the supremacy of the diffracted model over the other models. To that extent, this suffers from ethnocentrism. Riggs, in order to explain his concepts, extensively used the terms from physical sciences and life sciences. The terms such as fused, prismatic, diffracted, cleft are too confusing to a reader. The same concepts should have been explained in a simpler and common vocabulary. This made a critic to remark that contribution of Riggs to administrative theory is confusing or confucius. The criticism centered on the following: difficulties in using the language, lack of change orientations, a negative orientation of concepts and ethnocentrism, and absence of quantitative indicators. To sum up, the Riggsian ecological approach is one of the significant contributions to the study of administration. Riggs is a pioneer who widened the horizons of administrative concepts. He made an attempt to take an integrated view of the administrative reality. The administrative theories prior to Riggs were entirely rooted in the Western experience. The ecological approach of Riggs has come to strike a new roots based on the experiences of the developing societies. The whole approach is based on wide landscape covering from the traditional social systems to the modern advanced societies. The discussion on the characteristics of prismatic society, namely formalism, heterogeneity and overlapping, is intellectually a rewarding exercise. These characteristics are very much a part of the general experiences of people in most of developing societies. The skill with which these characteristics are applied to the subsystems of administration and its cultural and economic settings brings out the inherent interlinkages of a social system. The ecological approach, therefore, is one of the most comprehensive approaches to the study of public administration. In the recent past, there are very few concepts which can be considered as innovative and original.